Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Myself, Colonel Manoj Kumar Singh. I am the Director of Research at Forum for Global Studies. This is India's multidisciplinary global think tank. We are organizing a diplomatic conclave, India's G-20 presidency, the voice of Global South. Let me first talk about this Global South. In an attempt to balance the West with an eye on the North, India is hoping to rally the South. Recently, India organized two-day virtual voice of the Global South 23 Summit, and with the theme Unity of Voice, Unity of Purpose. It was India's attempt to add another note to the chorus of the global order. Over the last 3 decades, Indian diplomacy's focus has been on ordering its great power relations, bringing stability to the neighborhood and developing regional institutions in the extended neighborhood. What is this Global South? The term Global South began by loosely referring to those countries that were left out of the industrialization era and had a conflict of ideology with the capitalist as well as with the communist countries. And this was accentuated by the Cold War. It includes countries that are mostly in Asia, Africa, and South America. However, Global North is defined essentially by an economic division between the rich and the poor countries. What are the issues being faced by Global South? A large number of problems being faced by Global South, namely economic inequality, political instability, lack of infrastructure, climate change, limited human capacity. And there are a whole number of challenges being posed to this Global South from other countries. And some of the challenges are lack of unified stance, issue of Green Energy Fund, China's interference by BRI, North's interference in South, and many others. I'll leave it to the speakers to explore these issues. I will now quickly introduce our very distinguished panelists. We have our first speaker, Achal Malhotra, who is a former diplomat from the Indian Foreign Service. He served as the Deputy Permanent Representative of India to UN and international organizations in Vienna. He was India's ambassador to Armenia as well as to Georgia. He was also the director of Delhi Policy Group from 2012 to 2014. He is author of many interesting books, and last one being the South Caucasus Transition from Subjugation to Independence, Tracing India's Footprint. He is a distinguished fellow, South Caucasus Tilottama Foundation. Next, we have another very distinguished guest, Ambassador J.K. Tripathi, sir. He retired after serving the Indian Foreign Services for over 33 years, has vast experience in diplomacy. Experiences are from African countries, Europe, Middle East, and Latin America. In various capacities in Indian missions in Zambia, Maldives, Sweden, Venezuela, and Oman. As a Consul General of India in Sao Paulo, Brazil, as well as Ambassador of India to Zimbabwe. But he is a member of Association of Indian Diplomats, Commission System, a thing of non-aligned nations, and Ambassadors Club. He appears on various national media outlets on discussions. Distinguished guest is Dr. Swasti Rao, who is an associate fellow at the Europe and Eurasia Center at Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defense Analysis. In politics, specializes in international relations, and has an MPhil in East Asian Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She completed her PhD in Advanced International Politics from Tsukuba University, Japan. She was also recipient of Japanese Education Ministry Fellowship and Okita Memorial Scholarship in 2010 from ICCR. Position at Tokai University, Japan, in the capacity of a foreign collaborator for Japan Society for Promotion of Science. The forum to Dr. Tripathi to invite our speakers. And each speaker, I will request them to speak for 10 to 15 minutes. And at the end, after the third speaker, we'll have question and answer session. Dr. Tripathi.
Thank you so much, dear Manoj sir. for your welcoming remarks to our distinguished panelists. Dear friends, on behalf of the Forum for Global Studies, I extend my heart welcome to our distinguished panelists, renowned diplomats. Today we have with us Forum for Global Studies. At the same time, we have with us a very distinguished participants from different universities, including Warsaw University of Warsaw, Simanji, and from Nepal, Saroji, and other students from other universities. And still, we are waiting other panelists. So Dr. Swati Rao, she will be joining with us. So now I would like to invite a very distinguished panelist we have with us, Ambassador Achal Malhotra sir. Sir, we are so honored to have you on this diplomatic conclave, and we heard a lot you on different media outlets in this country, and I hope that our policymakers, our students, academia, industry, for G-20, uh, they will all be benefited from your deep insights, your perspectives, and your diplomatic experience. So now, sir, I welcome you, and now I would like to invite you. Now, floor is yours, sir. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Sandeep Tripathi, Colonel Sahab, and my dear friend Ambassador Tripathi and other co-panelists. Well, at the outset, I would like to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on an issue which is extremely important, and it is not only in any singular context, but in the larger context of what the future holds for India on the international arena. Colonel Saab has already given the definition of how South, what is a global South, and by holding a summit level meeting, what is the global South, in the year of our presidency of G-20, India has already given a signal which is very loud and clear that India is ready to take over the leadership of the global South and act as a bridge between the North and South. The thing I would like to mention in this context is that there are several factors which would support India's advent or India's endeavor or India's ambitions, whatever you may call, to offer itself as a leader of the global South and play a meaningful role in being a spokesperson for the global South in interaction with the North. These factors are historical in the sense that we have a vast experience of leading the developing world in the past. I am referring to our leadership in the NAM and our leadership also in the so-called G77 countries. True, the divide was different, the level of development was different, the issues were different, and also this all divide was in the context of more of ideologies than of the practical aspects. Today's situation is slightly different from what it was in the past, but even when we ourselves were at a very relatively low levels of development, we were there to help out our neighbors, our other compatriots, other countries which were developing or underdeveloped, and we were able to share our resources with them. And many countries had, we were able to inspire them in their national liberation movements. And we had a fairly good, experience. Our leadership was accepted, but then things started changing. Cold War was over. People said the NAM has lost its relevance, and it's we have also bring about certain fundamental changes in our approach. From non-alignment, we have entered into the era of multi-engagement, which essentially is the same. Like without being a part of alliance, we are emphasizing on partnerships. As a result, we have got strategic partnerships under various descriptions like comprehensive global partnership with the United States of America, special and privileged partnership with Russia, and so on and so forth. So where do we stand today? First of all, in my perception, uh, India is somewhere in between the North and South. We are part of the South, the global South, and yet we have, slightly moved towards the global North. So we are in a big transit, uh, in a state of transition from the global South to the global North, because we are today the fifth largest economy. We have an advanced science and technology. Our education levels are high. We are the IT, giants in the global context. We are the pharmacy, the global pharmacy, and and we have achieved good levels of food security. So, in short, we are a shade above many other developing countries. I'm not talking about China, but the bulk of the developing country or the bulk of the South, global South as we call it, we stand slightly higher than that. And then we have been interacting with all the multilateral, small, regional, global organizations, and we have been having a very meaningful interaction. We are accepted and invited by the G7. We are a part of G-20. We are this year having the presidency of that organization. We are into BIMSTEC, which is part North, part South, and so on and so forth. So we are in a good, situation where we can play a very meaningful role. But what are the constraints? Like, projecting yourself as a leader is not enough. The What is important is, are you also acceptable to rest of the global South? And the constraint comes because global South is not a united global South. At any given point of time, it was not. I recall my days in the days of multilateral diplomacy when I was in Vienna. We used to have regular meetings on NAM and G77 and other groups. It was extremely difficult even to come to consensus on certain issues, and ultimately, of course, it was a document which was broadly acceptable to various segments. The situation is even more complicated today. So the we are talking about a group which is not coherent, to say the least. So to be able to unite the voice, the purpose is clear. We want to lead the developing world in certain concrete areas. It's no more ideology alone. For example, there are many countries which want to de-link their economies, the de-dollarization of economy. There are many issues related to protectionism, nationalism, and there are issues related to multipolarity. There are issues related to, increased representation of the global South in the institutions of global governance and so on and so forth. But the point is, again, the global South is more divided than united. It's good to say, it's fine to project yourself as a spokesperson for a big large group, and try and see to it that their voice is heard on the international arena, and their views are incorporated into the decision making in all vital issues, whether they are climate change, whether it's terrorism, whether it's food security, energy security. But the constraint which I feel at this point of time is that we are talking about a region, or we are talking about a group of countries which between themselves are not united. And it would be an enormous task for us to, tune ourselves to the regional politics, and fine tune our politics according to the prevailing realities in different regions. And of course, there is a China factor also. China is one of the leading powers in Asia, has global ambitions, and there are many issues on which we don't get along. And then China has its own set of client states within this global South. So, with all these constraints in my mind, I would say yes. Very brief concluding remark is that India is definitely, qualifies to be the voice of the global South. And particularly because our credentials in the global north are very high, being a largest democracy, fastest growing economy, being a part of the G7, G20, and name any other organization which matters, we can play a very important role. But can we take along the global south with us? Can we ensure that they understand, the importance of our providing a leading role? And I believe most of the countries do understand, the kind of benign leadership that we have already, always provided to the global community, and that's the ray of hope that we might succeed, but it's going to be a very, very difficult part. So with these brief observations, I'll conclude at this point of time. I'll be glad to take any questions which you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Malhotra, sir, for your deep insights. The way you put, India has a potential, and India is having credential to become a voice between the North and the South, and India absolutely qualifies for that to become the voice, especially the South, global South. So thank you so much, sir, for your deep insights, and we we hope that at the coming summit, an ongoing summit, especially in September 2030 to 23rd, we are organizing this summit. So I hope that your remarks will be insightful for policymakers, especially those who are involved in that entire G20 mechanism. So thank you so much, sir, for your insights. Now we have with us the second speaker, Ambassador Tripathi, sir, and I'd like to invite sir. Now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malhotra, and I'm thankful to all the participants, Dr. Swati Rao, one of my best friends, Ambassador Achal Malhotra, Colonel Manoj Singh, and all the other participants for inviting me in this forum to say something about the G20, about the global South and India's role in it, or as we perceive it. As Ambassador Malhotra has very rightly pointed out, what are the constraints in the global South and India's perceived global leadership or spokespersonship for that. However, I would this morning only, I was going through a very small article in Science Direct magazine, it's volume 73 of March 2022, where in an article, Global Environment Challenge, the writers have detailed what global North had appropriated from global South during the period of 25 years from 1995 to 2015, that is 20 years. Now this gives a very good insight in what has happened to why the global North had been, say, exploited. It says that during this period, I'm sorry, it is 1990 to 2015, that is the 25 years. It says that during this period, 12 billion tons of raw material had been appropriated by global North from global South. 822 million hectares of embodied land, 22 exajoules of energy, 188 million person years of embodied labor, which totals roughly $10.8 trillion. And if we consider the total that has been appropriated by global North, it comes to $242 trillion US, which means it is enough to eradicate abject poverty from the world 21 times over. So you can imagine what type of exploitation global north has done for global south, from global south. Now coming back to what is there for India in the store and how can India best manage it. Now the basic challenges that we have are, like Ambassador Malhotra said, lack of unified stand among the global north countries. I do agree that yes, there is a lack of unity or unified stand. But what happens is we see in daily life, whenever there are few people, they need not agree on everything. And it is not quite surprising that most of them do not agree on many things. So we should not think that we should make them agree to any point, to all points. But like in democracies, in multi-party governments, you see, they agree on minimum common program. So at least that is something we should strive for. If we connect it with sustainable development goals, then maybe we can choose a few programs that we can have the support of all or most of the global south nations. Like green energy fund. With great difficulty in last G20, we were able, due to India's initiative, the developed countries have have agreed to pledge 100 billion US dollars for this fund. BRI, as my colleague Ambassador Malhotra has said, BRI is an impediment because China is trying to twist the arms of other smaller global south countries, is a big threat for not only for their independence, but for their economic prosperity also. And of course, North interference was there. What we can do, we should try to balance nationalism versus internationalism, especially after the arrival of COVID, a sense of ultra-nationalism had developed in the world. And countries, as you had seen, that countries were not very much helpful or not very much comfortable. Countries which had enough of medicine were not very comfortable in giving it, distributing it, or selling it at subsidized prices to other nations, other poor nations who needed it. So these things are impediments which we'll have to take care of, which we'll have to address. What we can do is probably we can try to, as I said, find out minimum common programs within the global south and try to project it to global north so that we can find a meeting point between the stands of two types of groups, which will be, for the time being, I think it will not be a tall order. Then there is lack of mutual trust between the countries, not only global north versus global south, but within the global south as well, as Ambassador Malhotra has detailed. Now, what we should do is perhaps we are in a better position, as he detailed, that we are acceptable to almost entire global north. We have friendly relations with them. And though we cannot or we should not try to mediate between the warring parties whenever there are flashpoints, but at least on economic matters, on climate change matters, we can raise our voice and we can think that it is a voice of the global south. COVID-19 had showed us that we can be the global pharmacy, and we are in a position to supply medicines to any country in need, irrespective of whether it is a member of global north or global south. And we have also shown that we have we have a few things which which with our initiative we can provide to the world, like our initiative in the solar energy projects, our initiatives in G-20, and luckily the three successive years, that is 2023, 2024, 2025, these are there the G-20 leadership is presidency is going to be to the members of Global South, that is India, Brazil, and South Africa. Now, G-20 being represented by some of the G7 members as well. So that can be a meeting point where we or Brazil or South Africa or other Global South members of the group can have successful, fruitful negotiations with other G20 members who are G7 or who are members of Global North. So these things, maybe I think these things will be, these things are achievable, not with very difficulty. And so instead of trying to do everything, we have to start with these things, one thing or two, one issue or two issue at a time. That will be perhaps the best thing that we could have. And as you all have said that in this year of India's presidency, lot of programs being organized, lot of things being done, and India can enhance its prowess in capacity building, in sharing its experiences in disaster management, in water protection of water tables, retention of water. Then again, the empowerment of women, which many of the African countries or Latin American countries and quite half of the Asia direly need. So with this, I conclude my address, and I think this will give other speakers a chance to deliberate more on specific points. Thank you very much, Dr. Tripathi.
Thank you so much, sir, Mr. Tripathi, sir, for your clips and deep analysis of G20, India's G20 presidency, and the way you put there are some difficulties in terms of the consensus, evolving a consensus among this global South, and there is some natural and but we can evolve a consensus in terms of some common goals. For example, SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, energy security, climate change, and all that. So we are so honored and we are so thankful to you, Ambassador Tripathi sir, for your very lucid analysis of a global South and the way how India can give the common voice and give the voice of united voice of global South. Thank you so much, sir, for your deep insights. Now we have with us a very renowned speaker, eminent speaker. I have been watching her so many televisions, and I hope that Dr. Swati Rao will have with us. She has joined us, and I hope that her analysis, her insights will be very remarkable and will be very significant for academia, for students, for industry, for policymakers, and very soon I invite you, and first of all I welcome you on behalf of the Forum for Global Studies that you accepted our invitation, and and now the floor is yours, Dr. Swati now.
Well, thank you so much, and a very good evening to everybody. I hope I'm audible and clearly so. And first of all, my apologies for not being able to join in time. I had something else that really kept me absorbed, but and nonetheless, thank you so much for the opportunity. And it's really an honor to share a panel with such distinguished speakers, who speak from their experience and who have served the nation. So without further ado, I think there are a lot of themes that I had thought of discussing here at this particular forum that I think have already been covered by ambassadors. So what I'll do is that I'll try to sort of talk more about certain issues that I had in mind. One would definitely be as to what really are the expectations from India, because India is hosting this, India is, the president of the G20, India is also the president of the SCO, and it is also a world where the world was recovering from an unfinished project of, COVID-19 recovery when the war in Ukraine happened. And I think Ambassador Malhotra really talked in great detail about how the world is divided, so I won't get so much there, but I will talk about what are the expectations that the rest of the world has from India. I will talk about, for example, I will talk a bit about why is it the moment of the global south. There are other speakers who have highlighted that, but I'll probably try to sort of put more into perspective about how G20 evolved, and so that there's a clear understanding of why this particular presidency is such a historic moment for India and for the global south. And then I would discuss why there is discontent with multilateralism, and how India can try and reinstate faith in multilateralism. And eventually I'll discuss some of the issues that the other speakers have also raised, but I'll try to add a certain a set of things that have not been discussed yet, and then I'll conclude. So this is how I intend to talk about it. If I overshoot my time, please be please don't mind to tell me, so that, if I'm overshooting time, but I'll try to talk in about 10-15 minutes. So like I said, that of course, there are a lot of expectations from India. As a president, India is required. And what the one thing that we need to understand is that G20 is a multilateral forum. And when we have taken, the point at which we have taken the presidency, I think what we're required to offer is practical solutions to a whole host of problems, a whole host of global commons, and also champion the voice of the global south. Now, obviously, everybody understands that G20 is not really a platform for solving political problems. It is definitely, and this is very basic, I don't need to get into it again and again, but G20 essentially is a forum for tackling financial problems, for tackling or for bettering or improving the global financial architecture. But nonetheless, for any other multilateral forum, there have been, not just now, just because of the Russia-Ukraine war, but many a times in the past as well, that political problems have taken over. There have been fault lines, and as president, I think it then incumbent upon that particular country to try and navigate all these divergences and try and look for as many convergences as possible. So I think that is what the world is looking at India for, which is to offer practical solutions. And how does India, because now we know that the war is not going to stop. In fact, I follow the war very closely. Russia is planning a spring offensive, and then, Ukraine is planning a counteroffensive. So as I understand, this is going to go long. Technically, I would also talk about it in my conclusion, but I think technically India would really want that towards the end of the Leaders Summit, when we are holding the Leaders Summit in September 2023, we would like, some sort of a decisive direction to the war, so that we can sort of steer our outcome document accordingly. But I do not see the war ending, by then. So I think when I say this as a parallel, we must also understand that the efforts from the world that are for mediation would also then sort of go in a parallel way. Anyway, coming back to G20, of course, India is looked upon as a credible player. Other speakers have also highlighted why is India, why does India have that credibility? I think the foremost reason is that India rejects the alliance worldview of the world, and India says that for solving a whole host of global commons, that we really need to have that collective, so to say, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which is also our philosophy for G20. So I think that the credibility, I mean, philosophy apart, but the credibility factor comes from the fact that we really reject, and we have tried our best to not fall into the alliance worldview of the world, and, maintain our strategic autonomy, and especially in 2022, as times became very trying because of the kind of pressure that we got from our allies and partners and friends to actually take stands on the war, for example. Then similarly, let me also now quickly tell you that why is it that the G20 is important, because it is also looked upon as a moment when India can reverse the discontent with multilateralism, because the one thing is that if you look at the challenges, I mean, the kind of challenges that the G20 has in its fold, I think a pertinent question is that can this grouping actually rise up to the occasion and meet these expectations? I mean, can it arrive at universally accepted agreements on such critical issues? There is economic security, there's trade divergences, there's climate, there's clean energy, digital economy, and all of this among countries that are not really united. So G20 needs to become that window of opportunity. Okay, but the problem is that, there are other multilateral institutions, for example, like the WTO, that no longer are relevant in many ways because it does not really have, they cannot really carry out the core functions of trade dispute resolution. Similarly, look at the credibility of the United Nations. I mean, we have been talking about it all the time, that unless and until the United Nations can, reinvent itself by actually reflecting the world order as it is today, it will just sort of, lose its relevance because of the veto impasse of the Security Council. So we've been talking about that. These institutions have not been able to address the global challenges. And then now the world attention is turning to G20. So, of course, I think this is India's moment to try and reinstate that declining faith in multilateralism, while at the same time considering the fact and attributing the correct space to rise of multipolarity. So I think technically, if you speak about it, technically or theoretically, a declining multilateralism is inversely proportional to a rising multipolarity, which is that, the more multipolarity rises, the more, multilateralism, declines. But at the same time, this is a catch-22 situation. We need a credible player that can provide the right balance, okay, between the two, because of course, multipolarity is on the rise. And I, as Ambassador Malhotra pointed out very correctly, that there are the trends, like, for example, there is a de-dollarization trend going on. There is this entire host of, for example, alternate ways of making international transactions, for example, the rupee ruble system, or the one that China has, etc. So there is no doubt about the fact that there are multiple centers of power, not just financial, but also geopolitical, that are geo-economic. They are rising, and you cannot, the advanced countries, the G7, for instance, they have to take that into account. Otherwise, what happens is that we are unable to solve any of the problems that the world has. So coming back, I think India, definitely there is an opportunity for India to try and balance these two trends, because without multilateralism, multipolarity would just amount to anarchy. Okay, and this is a statement which was very well reflected in one of the speeches that Antonio Guterres made, and when he was trying to reinstate that faith, that lost faith in multilateralism. So I think India kind of understands that, and India has the credibility to try and balance these two things. That's another thing. Now, like I said, I think there is a lot of hullabaloo of why this is the moment of the Global South. So obviously, this is a moment of the Global South. Somebody else also mentioned that, this is for the first time that the G20 presidency is going to be held by India. Before India, we had Indonesia. Now India, the next is going to be held by Brazil, and then so on. And after Brazil, it's South Africa. So I think what needs to be understood is that ever since G20 was relaunched, see, G20 has been around ever since 1999, but at that time it was meeting only at the finance ministers level. Okay, it was only after the 2008 global financial crisis that it was kind of relaunched as a rapid action grouping, which was supposed to meet at the apex level. So ever since it was relaunched, in 2008, actually the developing countries have chaired it on only 4 occasions. And I'll tell you, Mexico did it in 2012, China did it in 2016 or 15, I think 16. Argentina did it in 2018, and then Indonesia in 2022. So India's presidency is the 5th such occasion, and India will be followed by Brazil and then South Africa. So therefore, that is the historic bit for the developing countries, that the G20 troika for 2 successive terms, there are 2 successive troikas are being held by the developing world or the global South. So that is where, why we kind of celebrate it, not just as a moment for India, but as a moment for, global South. And then it by that definition, it also becomes a moment for all these regional groupings to seek greater economic convergence on sustainable development goals, etc. And then I think it would not be an overstatement if I would say that India has really been trying to do justice, to its this portfolio of a representative of the global South, because we just had this global South forum. I mean, I may be getting the name wrong, but then we had this massive meet of the developing countries recently, where I think it was the idea was to brainstorm better about how to come to solutions, or to give them a platform so that they are able to express their misgivings and problems. And then that is where India becomes the bridge, of taking that and then, adding it to the G20 agenda, etc. Now, very quickly, I think India's priorities have been listed very well, but I will now just talk about, in whatever time I'm left with, about certain challenges. And so, for example, I think Ambassador Malhotra mentioned about food security, and I think everybody would know that food security is such a thing. So, for example, let me just tell you something interesting about it, and that will also sort of highlight why the continuity that is there because of the troika is so important for the G20. So, for example, when the G20 summit was being held in Italy, then there were certain things that were brainstormed, which were put together as the Matera Declaration, and this Matera Declaration was adopted by Indonesia in 2021, and then when India was, at that time, the successor was to be the successor, and India really supported this Matera Declaration. So what is this Matera Declaration? This is just to give you one example of how the consistency of the troika works so well with the G20. So this particular Matera Declaration, please Google it sometime. It's a fairly important document. So this initiative calls for ensuring sustainable food systems, poverty alleviation, agricultural diversity, etc. And it also focuses very rightly on public development banks and how they could stimulate private investments and mitigate market risks and failures, etc., especially for financing small and medium enterprises. Now, when this came up, India welcomed this initiative and declared that this agenda actually resonates with India's concern for the welfare of small and medium farmers and promoting agricultural diversity, not only in India, but for the global South as well. Now, similarly, so this is one of the things which are, I would say, in my opinion, a very good example of how the troika, if it works properly, can really arrive at, solutions. Now, similarly, one of the things that India, for example, has been offering, like I said, that India is being looked upon as a player that can give practical solutions. So I'm sure everybody has heard about it, but for example, for tackling food security, now India proposed back in 2018 that why not observe 2023 as the International Year of Millets. Okay, now subsequently, this was endorsed by the United Nations General Assembly. And, India is one of the world's largest producers of millets. There is a whole range of reasons why the millet production is favored. And now this is something which is now connected with the Matera Declaration. And I think what will happen is that India has also supported the G20 agenda of trying to develop this finance and common working group on financial sustainable food developments, where Matera declarations and millets, etc., all of those dots have been joined. And this particular initiative is led by the IFAD, or the International Fund for Agricultural Development. So I'm saying that these are the ways in which you see the practical solutions coming into place, and how, having this, smooth functioning of the troika becomes important. Similarly, I think we all have been talking about digital economy and how India G20 is a platform for India to offer, our success with the UPI payments and the direct benefits transfer, Aadhaar authentication, why there's so much focus on the startup. So it really is something which is, taking into account that. But now let me talk about something that India has been standing for, has delivered on, and still this is something which is a big problem in the world, which is about the global health architecture. And let me here mention the role of the vaccine. So for example, G20 as a grouping has failed so far to coordinate policies around the global health architecture. So the different leaders, before India, they have repeatedly highlighted the critical role of coordination in ensuring, say, for example, equitable access to vaccines, pharmaceuticals. But there is a wide gap which remains in the global production and distribution of COVID vaccines. And why do I say this? I say this again and again because, India has really played the stellar role when it has come to vaccine diplomacy. So now we need to take this up and put it on to the G20, deliverable, and we really need to tackle that. For example, the overall number of administered vaccines has risen dramatically. There's no doubt about it. But so has the inequality of the distribution. So I'll give you an example and it'll tell you why it is so serious. So of, say, about 10 billion doses which are given out worldwide, only 1% of those doses have been administered in low-income countries. Now, India has called for removing trade barriers and vaccine differentiations, COVID passports, and other mobility restrictions. But the problem is that there are so many other G20 members, for example, like UK or Germany, who have opposed it, right? EU has agreed to it, but only partially. So the EU has agreed to a partial TRIPS waiver, not all of it. And then there is a grouping within G20, which is championed by Indonesia, South Africa, and India, who have been really trying to assert that they need this, they need a complete waiver. Now, this is something which has not really been successful so far. And I think India needs to bring all the pragmatism and success with its vaccine production and distribution to really resolve this G20 impasse. Now, similarly, there are so many other points, and that is why the Global South debate is so important. The voice, the conversation of the Global South is so important. Let me give an example of the global inequality from a different angle. Now, so for example, we all know that there is a North-South divide over the SDR allocations. We all know that SDR allocations and their role in trying to fight, the COVID pandemic slowing down and all the challenges that the COVID pandemic brought, and all that. So now what has happened is that the IMF reserves have been boosted with about, I think, $650 or $700 billion. But the problem is that this is not going to solve the problem of the Global South. Why? Because the SDRs are allocated proportionally to countries' quotas at the IMF. So distribution is mathematically, it is bound to get skewed towards richer countries which have given more quota with advanced economies. And what has happened is that statistics tell us that about 67 to 70% of this allocation is again going to the advanced countries, while low-income countries are again receiving only about 1%. And this is all IMF data. Now, similarly, if you want to close the gap between rhetoric and practice on public services, the World Bank, the IMF, etc., should approve a new allocation of SDRs, right? The thing is that unless and until the G20 are united for this, we will not see a lot of development on this. So this is something that has been taken up again and again. And why am I focusing so much on this, gentlemen, is because we must remember that the core duty of the G20 is to improve the global financial architecture. And, one of those things is how do we ensure recovery from all the problem that the COVID-19 pandemic brought. So, and then let's also remember that the Ukraine war is going to come up with its own economic problems for the advanced countries. So these things are really easier said than done. I do not expect that India would be able to give some sort of a magic solution to these, but I do expect that the kind of pragmatism, diplomatic experience that we have, the way we have been championing the voice of the Global South, I do expect a certain tangible progress, on this agenda that can successively be taken over later by the one who succeeds India. Now, similarly, there's a problem with dispute settlement. Let me not go there. And then, sorry, the one thing that I would like to mention definitely is the climate goals, because this is one area that has been repeated, getting that a lot of attention, lately. And this is also one of the core themes of India's presidency, about how to tackle the climate change, challenge. And I say this also because, this is one area where we are seeing a lot of dynamism. Okay. So at COP26 in Glasgow, our Prime Minister proposed this mission called Mission Life, which places individual behavior at the core of the global climate action narrative. And it intends to establish a global network of individuals known as the pro-planet people, etc. Now, by this simple idea, the Prime Minister envisions to connect every single individual and, Indians with the goals of India's G20 commitments, with the SDG commitments, etc. Similarly, at COP27, as well, we saw that India really focused so much on climate finance, which going beyond the existing annual, say, I think the 100 billion pledge, which has been made by the advanced economies to assist the developing nations in climate change adaptation, etc. From 2020 to 2025, I think it's a 5-year plan. Yeah. So now the pledge has been made, but whether the money, is the money enough? I'm sure the money is definitely not enough. There are so many reports that say it's just a drop in the ocean. But the point is, as a G20 president, will India be able to see this pledge reaching a fruition, reaching a fulfillment, is something I think that India needs to oversee. Similarly, there are so many other things about the phasing out approach of coal versus phasing down approach of coal. I mean, all developing countries they do not have the kind of, economic heft, the technological heft to make the transition to green or renewables. Okay, similarly, so then they have to have somebody that fights for, having a phase down approach of coal rather than having a phase out approach, which, just calls for, stopping the use of coal as a fuel, etc. But the good thing is that what the Ukraine war has taught the West in many ways is the pragmatic utility of reality, which is that we have seen that countries like Germany, where there is a Greens party, that are a part of their coalition, under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, even they have agreed to going back to burning coal because the supplies from Russia, the natural gas supplies, are disrupted so badly. But that's a different debate. I mean, I'd like to take that later. But all I'm saying is that this is something that India also needs to put in a very, I would say, strong enough manner so that the economic interests of the global South do not suffer. Similarly, then, of course, I think there's already been a lot of mention about India's commitment to SDGs. And I think if you really read the India's, overall, worldview about how it plans to take ahead the G20 agenda, you will see that the SDGs are somewhere enmeshed all over that framework. So that is something that I would not really overstate, that importance is already established. Similarly, there are a lot of, initiatives on clean energy where India can really provide an opportunity. One thing that I can definitely tell you right now is that with the Russia-Ukraine war in Europe, there is a frantic, I would say, push to make transition to renewables, and they are looking for production of green hydrogen. And because of all the economic slowdown and the other challenges and the fuel costs, etc., right now, it makes much more sense for the European Union and all the European countries to look for that hydrogen production outside of Europe. And India, if you remember, I think in 2020, we came up with our own hydrogen policy. So that's also one of the things that I've been arguing, that, this is also one area where we can really converge. India can show a lot of, way ahead by giving subsidies. The government is giving subsidies, and all of this, this one sun, one world, one grid, all such things are actually kind of, I would say, connected with India's the larger G20 presidency agendas as well. So I think the speaker before me already mentioned that India, there is a special focus on the role of women, on the role of youth, on, and all of that. So I think it's very inclusive from in my opinion. But I would just conclude with this bit of a caveat that, you see, G20 may not be the perfect multilateral forum, and one should not expect that the G20 will have a solution for all the problems in the world. But it definitely is it is a rapid response crisis management group that has a unique size, it has a flexible structure, and if used optimally, in my opinion, I see that it can deliver on a lot of objectives that promise collective good. And India can shape those because of its credible position in the world order today. So it truly is India's moment to infuse new hope. Now, this is only one part of the story. We are just starting out. I think all over this 2023, we will see how it is unfolding. And I would also just hope for the best, like everybody else, and we would see towards the end of the year as to how far could we go and how far could we deliver on our promises and on our, commitments with the G20. So with this, I would just like to close my remarks and then looking forward to more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Swasti Rao, for your very illuminating remarks on the Global South. And I think you have covered all aspects of the G20. And your remarks, as already I said, that's very, very useful for all of us. And you have touched upon the grips of the theme, the basic theme of the global. So G20 is provide a global health architecture, as well as the focus areas could be the global financial management, and the way India has potential to put the human-centric energy security. For example, you have mentioned the climate finance in COP27 and the COP26. We have approach for the a pro-human approach for the climate change. So I think you have covered all the areas, and even you have highlighted the challenges. But India has the potential to overcome these challenges. And the way you have put ideas about the division between the North and the South, and the kind of discrimination from the especially the global institutions like IMF, the World Bank, especially in distributing, especially the distributing the SDG remarks. So I think Dr. Swasti Rao, again, I thank you very from the from global studies, and I hope that your remarks are going to be very, very fruitful for all of us. Now, I'd like to invite some questions from the participants to all of speakers, and then later on, we have with us Baslu Singh that we will give the vote of thanks. So, I invite the questions from the participants.
Yeah, Dr. Tripathi, what I would like to hear add-on remarks by
yeah, sure, sir.
Number one,
most welcome.
What Ambassador Tripathi had mentioned about exploitation of the South by the North. It can be the very good example has been a historical one from Anglo-Persian Treaty of 1919, wherein the Britishers entered into the polity of Iran and continued till Shah was ousted in 1951, and all the oil, 90%, 80 to 90% was exploited by the Britishers. And again, Mossadegh was somehow removed by use of force and other means by Western forces. And that's a very apt example what Ambassador Tripathi was talking. The second is what Dr. Swasti Rao had mentioned, firing up of coal in Germany, in UK. Here I would like to also bring about one point that we had a very distinguished guest from Israel who had mentioned earlier in one of our seminars with Forum for Global Studies, Dr. Eli Rittig, the professor, who had mentioned that with the advancement in the nuclear field is now one of the safest ways to produce energy, but then the industrialized world will not accept it so easily, because all those that, I mean, the world energy industry is playing out on the fears of disasters and other things, whereas now we have learned how it can be made secure. The nuclear energy, people are not talking about it. Of course, hydrogen is a good option. That's all right. These were the two add-on observations from my side, and the floor is open for the questions.
Any questions from the participants? We have with us Mr. Simon Bharti from the University of Warsaw. Dear Simon, any questions?
Sir, my question is, what can be done or how India can be balance nationalism and internationalism?
Kaushalendra is from the GLA University, Mathura. And your question to Ambassador Malhotra sir, Tripathi sir, yeah, Dr. Sastri Rao.
Sir, my question is from Jitendra sir.
Okay, Tripathi sir.
Now you see, internationalism which has risen after or during the COVID-19 has a sort of threatened internationalism. But what we can do in G20, that if we have a common minimum program on which all the countries or most of the countries of South agree, like distribution of critical vaccines, distribution of life-saving drugs, like education, empowerment of women. These programs, on these programs, I don't think there would be many nations in Global South which will oppose these. So what we can do is we can start with these common minimum program sort of thing, with which we can have a very judicious blend of internationalism and nationalism. We need not go for in political arena, or we need not go in geopolitics for that. But on humanitarian ground, we should, on humanitarian perspective, we should try to achieve a balance first. And then later on, maybe we can think of other modes once the confidence building approach succeeds. Thank you.
Any question? We have with us Dr. Rukmani Joshi. Any question, Dr. Joshi, from your side?
Dr. Tripathi, there is a question on the chat.
Okay.
The question is, what steps can be taken to tackle the recession, which is all the countries of G20 nations are facing today? This question is from Khushi Priya. And may I ask Dr. Rao to respond to this?
I think it's a relevant question that Khushi has asked, which is that what steps can be taken for G20 recession? See, one of the things that usually is not talked about much is, and especially like right now when we are discussing India's G20 presidency, is that basically the core of the G20, like I said, it's how to improve the global financial architecture. We must always remember what really brought the G20 into existence. And this was the repeated financial crises, okay, which were a result of the banking crisis. So what the G20 has been doing, and not just India, but also Indonesia, when India was part of the Troika. So I've been discussing why the Troika is important. So one of the things that are directly related with how to recession is of course one thing. See, G20 can do little about recession because understand that we were already in the middle. We had not yet concluded. We were in the middle of an unfinished project of recovery from COVID-19 pandemic when the Ukraine war started. Okay, so now to actually expect that G20 is going to tackle this particular recession is something which is, I think it is too ambitious a question, but let us understand that G20 is doing a lot, okay, with respect to its finance tracks, because there are different engagements groups and finance tracks and, working groups within the G20 that actually take on this particular agenda or take on this or look after this particular, responsibility of improving the global financial architecture. And what I want to come to is the idea called the capital adequacy framework. So capital adequacy frameworks are basically certain frameworks that all banks must, the central banks particularly, that actually decide the fiscal and the monetary policies, particularly the fiscal policies. So the central bank, the G20 central banks have to agree to certain capital adequacy frameworks, which act as cushions against volatile economic situations. Okay, so for example, let me just give you an example. For this, I'm not sure if you've heard about it or not, but there are certain things called the Basel norms, right? So one of the financial agendas of the G20 is to actually upgrade these Basel norms. India is particularly, I think, at Basel 3, not really at 4. The most advanced countries within the G20 are already trying to make an upgradation from Basel 3 to Basel 4. I mean, I could be just getting the number wrong, but what I'm trying to say is that these norms are also about how to ensure that the banks do not crumble in the face of financial crises, because this was one of the reasons. 1997 financial crisis, 2008 financial crisis, all these happened because of these certain problems that the banks had with respect to not having adequate capital adequacy that led to this meltdown that happened. So one of the things that G20, like you said, that what steps can be taken. So the finance tracks of the G20s are already working on how to make the capital adequacy frameworks more resilient. They work better. There are lot of tracks which are working on this. The capital adequacy frameworks are taken up by almost all, like I said, the major banks across the G20 countries. Now, one of the problems there is, and I'm just trying to connect it to the divide bit, is that when you have a country, a G20 economy like Russia, which is expelled from from the SWIFT banking systems, it is definitely going to have, like in the short term, we have not seen much, but in the longer term, it will have a lot of impact that we have not been able to assess right now on the global financing and global economic architecture as well. So these are things that we are preparing ourselves for. The other thing about the G20 recession, what is coming to my mind straight away after the capital adequacy frameworks and the finance tracks, commitments to those, is that perhaps the G20, for example, food security. Now, obviously, we are amid a global inflation. I mean, all these countries, all the advanced countries, they are facing an inflation. The bigger countries like the US and China, they're saying that they could also now get into a zone of stagflation, okay, which is like stagnant economy and a lot of inflation, okay. So one of the things that the G20 can do is by offering these practical solutions of, tackling food security, for instance, because if you remember, one of the fallouts of the Russia-Ukraine war was that all the grain that was coming to the developing countries from the Black Sea, those were, that was not able to come. And then, Turkey and United Nations had to get into this, diplomacy and allow for the grain exports to continue. So I think those are certain of the things that are coming to my mind, right now as to what really can be done if from the G20 perspective to tackle, recession. The good part is that you see, India again becomes a credible player here, because you may be hearing these lines or these statements again and again, in different news media outlets, etc. Is that India, IMF said that why in today's, if you look at the economic rates of countries, you would see that while most of the bigger economies are stagnating or showing a negative, growth rates, India is one country that has shown a positive growth rate, and which again is a beacon of hope, okay, for at least the global South. So I think those are the kind of things that we should tackle, because again, remember, it is not about India alone, or not just the success story of the Indian startups alone, but this is something that we have to do at a collective level. So I would just conclude and say, I think personally, I feel that if the finance tracks, which are at the core of the G20 agenda, if they are functioning well, if they are having the right amount of attention with respect to capital adequacy, that would really equip the world for handling a situation like a recession. But for that, I think we have to work on resilient supply chains. We have to work not only, I mean, that part is a different conversation that the world is trying to do, which is, how do we tackle, the fuel costs, etc. And of course, by and large, one of the bigger things that India is doing, that is why we've been saying it again and again, that this is not an era for war, because one of the most prominent, effects that we are seeing is on the global economy. And so let's see, it's not really in India's hand to stop, but like I said, we can steer it. We can try to steer it. Yes.
May I ask Ambassador Achal Malhotra, sir, what I feel that this is challenging. See, India's presidency is sort of a challenge to Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. Also, in the vicinity, he doesn't like India's supremacy in the world affairs. What's your take on? In fact, there were a lot of comments earlier that Yangtze clashes even took because India had assumed presidency of G20, which I don't feel it was right. What's your take on this, sir?
Well, Colonel Saab, as far as China factor is concerned, uh, the G20 presidency, as we all know, is a rotational presidency. It had to come sooner or later. In fact, we had also wanted to have this presidency in 2018, if I'm not wrong. But for some reasons, there were already certain commitments, and so we did not take it in 2018. And but as far as China is concerned, just go back a few years ago, we had offered a hand of friendship to China and said if India and China were to work together, this century can belong to Asia. But unfortunately, China wants to be the global leader and wants us to play a second fiddle role. And that's the problem. And BRI is not the only issue. BRI, people, it has already started showing the adverse, the negative parts of BRI are already visible. And Sri Lanka is the most glaring example in our neighborhood and to the rest of the world also. How this debt trap is, they are getting trapped into this China's loans and all that kind of stuff. But the larger issue is that China, we wanted China to work together with us and play a meaningful role on the global arena, and we were doing to a certain extent. We were working on that through the within the frameworks of, say, for example, BRICS or India, Russia, China front. Of course, the issues were different, but BRICS is the most important forum, in my opinion, where India and China were working with other countries to 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 address many issues which are also the issues of concern for the global South. For example, Swati mentioned about the unequal distribution of resources to the developing countries, the discriminatory this thing. And as a result, the BRICS came out with the idea of the New Development Bank. But now that China has already decided not to collaborate or cooperate with us, so this is a factor we have to keep it in our mind. That is not going to stop us from playing the kind of role which we have the potential to play. And irrespective of China, and despite and in spite of China, I think we will continue to adopt our policies and take the rest of the world along with us. The good thing is that there is an anti-China sentiment which is already prevailing, and the kind of credibility and the credentials which India enjoys. So this China factor is not going to really affect. We still are willing to follow the policy of cooperation wherever it's possible, collaboration wherever it's possible, compete with China wherever it is called for, contain China where it is absolutely necessary. So I think this situation is going to remain, and the China factor is also going to remain for considerable period of time. But that is not going to, I think, dictate the kind of policies we are adopting on the global front. I hope I have been able to explain myself.
Thank you, sir. Now, think again one question from Kaushlen. Yes, Kaushlen, go ahead.
Sir, my question to Swati ma'am. Does the G20 put economically weaker countries at a disadvantage?
Hi. So before I answer that question, just going back to Ambassador Malhotra and what he was talking about, India and China, and if China has this problem with India taking the world stage, etc. Let me also just kind of remind the viewers here is that it's not just G20. There is another multilateral forum that India's is a president of this particular year, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is also a multilateral forum where India is sitting on the same table as China, as Pakistan, So Russia, Iran is a follow, I mean, as an observer, but will soon become a member, and the 5 Central Asian countries. So what I'm trying to say is that let's understand that there are, I mean, I think India's, just to add to what Ambassador Malhotra was saying, that India's perspective to all this is that we are going to talk to you, because we need to find convergences. Okay, so G20 is not the only one. There's also SCO, and SCO is a completely different grouping with a different, geopolitical underpinning and a different set of toolkit, to deliver there. It's not really very helpful for India because our arch rivals are there, but nonetheless, we are the president of the SCO as well, and we are going to be having their leaders summit very well. And, the place where I work in, we are also focusing a lot on that. So it's a mixed bag. Okay, that's one. Now to the question about has the G20 had, the global south at a disadvantage? In short, what I can tell you is that there is a reason why in my presentation also I was reading again and again that why is it a moment of the global south? Because if you remember, I told you that it is only on 4. I think the person can mute themselves at the back so that it's clearer. So I think it was only at 4 or 5 occasions that actually after 2008, when the G20 started to exist in its current format, because I told you that in 1999, when the grouping was made, it was only meeting at financial level. It was only in 2008 when the G7 said that let's launch, and at that time it was G8 because Crimea had not happened. So they said that let's relaunch it at the apex level, and the apex level summit happened. And ever since 2008 to 2023, where we are today, the global south have held its presidency on only 5 occasions. So it is only now for the first time that we're seeing that 2 successive troikas are comprising global south. Why do I say it again and again? Is because we have to understand that just by making a multilateral forum with some members from the developing south will not serve any purpose. The point is that the global south, the voice of the global south, the concerns of the global south, the fact that something like a COVID-19 pandemic would affect the global south far more than it would the advanced north. Those kind of things, the policies around climate change, all these policies which are existential, to the world, are having a different set of impact. They are having a different impact set for the global north versus the global south. And is there somebody at the apex level within the G20 that can really bridge this gap? And that is why if you say that the G20 have been held at a disadvantage, I would say that, yeah, maybe, yes, okay. While on the one hand, the global north realizes that without taking the global south on board, they will not be able to come to or arrive at sustainable, tangible developments or decisions to actually tackle the global commons. So this realization is there. Okay, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, I do not think that we have ever seen the global south being represented at G20 in a way that we see happening right now under India's presidency. So I think that this entire endeavor that the Indian leadership has shown around organizing this global, voice of the global south forum, etc., is to actually provide more legitimacy that while the G20 does not have all the global south countries on their agenda, I mean, I'll just give you another example. Just look at the kind of guests that we have, invited, because as a president, you have the, this thing to, you can choose the guests you wish to invite. And who has India chosen to invite? So India has chosen to invite Bangladesh. India has chosen to invite Egypt. Egypt was also, on 26th January, by the way, chief guest. So anyway, so Bangladesh, Egypt, Mauritius, Nigeria, Singapore, Spain, Oman, UAE, of course. India and UAE relations are going very sturdy. So what is India's, thing? So the point is that if I just want to put it in a nutshell and try and sort of conclude all that I've been trying to convey, is that the voice or the concerns of the global south have not really been represented, not really been voiced in a manner in which it is being done right now under India's presidency. So this is something which is historic. Let's look at positive outcomes. Let's see, let's meet again. And I'd say that to the organizers as well, that let's also, again, all of us meet and try to see what progress have been made? Has India been able to deliver on its promises? Because this really is something very historic in its way. And so far, to your question, has the interest of the global south, has the countries been partial? I would say yes. Yes, they have been, and that is the reason why the global south feels so so feels that they don't really have a platform where they can express their misgivings. So yeah, I'd agree to that.
Ma'am, my one more question from my side. That's the last question from my side. Ma'am, Hindenburg report, which is come on the analysis of the Adani group, it will impact the economic conditions of India and G20 summit. It will affect any effect on Indian economic conditions or G20 summit.
Well, I mean, it's just come up
think-
2 days ago, right? It's just come up 2 days ago, and what I'm saying is that it might. I mean, it's just something that has come up 2 days ago. So, I mean, how do you expect me to sort of say that it is going to impact the G20 agenda? So the other thing is that, see, the SEBI, for example, has already started investigating these allegations, and the Reserve Bank of India has also asked all the banks or the details that have been given to the Adani group. So I think the point is that, like I said, that we are not really living in a perfect world, but the point is that if something like this is coming or is highlighted, one of the ways in which one should look at it is that what are the efforts around trying to take it up in the right way. So let's see what the reports or of these investigations are. Like SEBI has started its investigations. The report has come 2 days ago. These are allegations. The RBI has already asked all the banks to give the details of the loan, etc. So similarly, I mean, I think it's very early for me to sort of comment that what kind of an impact would this have on the G20 per se. Right now, I think it would be very irresponsible of me to say that, yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Let's see where it is going to go. But I would not really say that this is going to have a clear impact on something or not. But at the same time, I think it also somewhere shows that, we must not take things on face value. So, of course, there are these, this big corporatization of governments, which is going on all over the world. So I think this is something which is going to add many layers to that. But at the same time, it would be very early for me to say that this is going to have an impact on the G20 agenda particularly. I think it's really early.
My take on this is, ma'am, that it may not affect at all, because even Hindenburg, not acceptable by US government.
Yeah. So yes, we also have to understand. Yeah, we need to know. I mean, it's way too
Achal sir, Dr. Achal, Ambassador Achal sir. You wanted to add on, sir?
Unmute yourself, Achal.
You're mute, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
I just wanted to add one small observation, whether or not it will have impact on the proceedings of G20. Of course, some of the shareholders have already been impacted, and there's nothing that can be done about it. But in the course of investigations, after all the investigations have gone into, if there is a systemic failure, or systemic loopholes which are discovered, leading to a situation like this, I'm sure G20 will have a lot of homework to do and see how in the financial system all over the world can be improved upon. To that extent, it will add on to the G20's agenda. Thank you.
So thank you so much. I think the questions is over. So now I would like to invite Vaishnavi Singh for vote of thanks. Vaishnavi.
Greeting all. I, Vaishnavi Singh, researcher to FGS think tank. As we have come to the closure of this conference, I deem it to take a great honor to express the vote of thanks. I feel deeply gratified to the panelists that we had today. Ambassador Achal Malhotra, sir, I extend warm gratitude to you. Sir, you started with the factors that India holds to be leader in the South, following by the global partnerships that India have with other countries like USA and Russia. And India is somewhere in the transitional phase, having the space between the North and South. Sir, it was very illuminating. Thank you for being part of today's event. Next distinguished guest in the row we had Ambassador Jitendra Kumar Tripathi, sir. Sir, you had started briefing about an article that was relating to the exploitation that North has done to the South, following by how India can stand strongly and unified. Also, sir, your input had made a very clear picture of the current circumstances. Thank you for being part of today's event. Next in the row, we had Swasti Rao, ma'am. Ma'am, you highly enlightened us all as you highlighted the real motto of G-20 and what world really expect from India as India being the president to the G-20, following by how India will hold or rebuild the faith of multilateralism. Thank you so much. It was highly illicit. My vote of thanks would not be complete without mentioning Dr. Sandeep Tripathi sir and Manoj Singh sir for organizing such amazing conferences. Also, I extend my gratitude to the lovely audience for being so patient. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vaishnavi. A vote of thanks. Once again, thanks all of you, and especially Ambassador Malhotra sir, Ambassador Tripathi. Lots of thanks from Global Studies.